Here's Richard Swinburne to try to convince us that being gay should be stigmatized.
It seems very, as it were, simple to say that same-sex, if someone is homosexual and wants sexual relations with another homosexual, society ought to allow that, simply because you're just taking these two people into account. But the consequence of making this general might be rather disastrous. And I think in some respects it would be, because it would denigrate marriage.
Swinburne is talking about tolerance for gay folks like it's some hypothetical scenario. Being gay hasn't been illegal in England since 1967, and he says the consequences of generally allowing folks to be gay would be disastrous. Well, where's the disaster? It's been almost 60 years and the sky hasn't fallen yet. And also, how would it denigrate marriage? How would letting gay couples exist make people see marriage as being of less value?
And it would and marriage is very important because it is through marriage that we have stable families in which to build up children.
Then you'd better let gay couples get married because they end up with children sometimes too.
Now, two homosexuals can't have that sort of relation to their children. They can't have children in that way.
Neither can infertile heterosexual people. Should we deny marriage to them as well? If a postmenopausal widow falls in love again and wants to remarry, should she be prohibited from doing so because she can't have children in the conventional way? Would her relationships denigrate marriage?
So, if one encourages homosexuality instead of, as it were, discouraging that practice, that will be to the benefit of society as a whole.
I'm having trouble following the reasoning here. If we discourage homosexuality, people will enter into more heterosexual marriages? Obviously, this isn't going to happen to people who are not attracted to the opposite sex.
And it's no good saying, well, people are born one or the other. They don't think they are born one or the other. Some people are born one or the other, but the statistics show that some people are born binary and can go one way or the other.
That's not what binary means. That's the opposite of binary. I think Swinburne means that some people are bisexual, and sure, but are we really going to stigmatize all gay relationships just to increase the number of bisexuals who marry the opposite sex? That seems like an awfully drastic approach, just to slightly decrease the number of kids raised by step-parents or adoptive parents. And would it even really be a good thing to reduce the number of people looking to adopt children? Wouldn't it be better to increase the number of couples who are open to adopting?
And therefore, we ought not to encourage this homosexuality.
Who's encouraging it? We just want it to not be stigmatized. That's not the same thing as encouraging it.
I'm going to bring Peter for a response. You opened this can of worms, Peter, so you best break your veganism and eat them with a response.
I just want to say that I do strongly disagree with the claim that this is going to weaken relationships because, of course, people of the same sex are going to have sex. Sex is a very powerful desire. And in fact, allowing them to marry may make more stable relationships with them, as it may make with heterosexual people. So I think to prevent people fulfilling their desires when, as you say, at least looking at the two of them, they're not harming anyone else, on the basis of a speculation that this is somehow going to weaken the marriage bond between heterosexuals who do have children. And incidentally, of course, we do now allow same-sex couples to adopt children, so they may have children too. I think that that's quite wrong.
We don't need to speculate. We have decades of data about this. Legalizing being gay has not correlated to an increase in divorce rates or a decrease in marriage rates. Marriage rates have been dropping, but that drop doesn't seem to coincide with legalizing being gay or recognizing gay marriage. And the proportion of marriages that end in divorce peaked in the early 80s and has been dropping ever since.
I think that we would need much firmer grounds for saying that this is in some way going to be truly damaging to society as a whole or truly damaging to children.
Given how long it has been since many countries have allowed gay marriage and allowed gay folks to adopt, one would expect these supposedly disastrous consequences to have manifested by now, but we don't see them.
If we allow that. And I think, in fact, the experience that we've had now, and we have some years of experience with same-sex marriages, doesn't go to confirm the idea that it's harmful.
But it's no good saying they will anyway.
Well, given that gay couples will get together anyway, and sometimes they will end up with kids anyway, wouldn't you prefer a gay couple with kids to be married rather than unmarried?
But it's no good saying they will anyway do it. They may consider that it would be wrong to do it. And many people in certain religious communities, and I include my own, would think it wrong to do it. And although they were homosexually inclined, they would not do it.
Yeah, you can shame people into abstaining from being in loving relationships. The question is whether that's worth doing, and I see no reason to believe it is.
And they would not do it, firstly, because they believed God had forbidden it, and secondly, they would see he had a reason for making it, for forbidding it, in order to give us the opportunity to build up a society in which people aren't encouraged to be homosexual. I'm not saying it should be forbidden or anything like that.
If you think God forbids it, and that he has good reason to forbid it, why aren't you saying that it should be forbidden?
And thirdly, I do think that it's a matter of fact whether God has or has not approved of certain practices. And I will, if you like, talk about that for some time. But
who cares? The Bible has some pretty weird moral prescriptions in it. In fact, if you're worried about the denigration of marriage, don't read Paul's epistles. He said that unmarried and widowed people should just stay unmarried unless they just can't keep it in their pants.
I'm going to bring Jessica in, first of all, before we go to Alex. Jessica, on the same topic?
Kind of on the same topic. I mean, just on that issue, I'm not going to wade in big time on that. Everyone has their own views. It's interesting to know that there are cultures. So my favorite culture in the whole wide world, best place, beautiful society, is, in my own personal feeling, Thailand. England comes in second. I love the Thais as a culture. They're really they're really intriguing. It's a culture that has never had a problem, as far as we can tell historically, at any point with homosexuality.
It's one of the few places in Asia where gay marriage is legal, although they only just legalized it this year.
They've never found it odd or problematic in any way, and they've been perfectly happy to have couples. In fact, my experience when living there is they really like gay couples because they actually are this lovely, stable, pleasant sort of group of people, and female couples are seen as great in business. So I think these ideas about what it is even that makes society work, a practical point, a rational, not an ethical one, and what is actually good and natural, and indeed what is emotionally triggering, are extremely culturally diverse and relative.
Is Thailand some unusually dysfunctional society because of its long history of acceptance of gay folks? It doesn't seem that way.
I think I am going to wade in for a moment because a moment ago we witnessed a debate. And I first want people to notice that it was a factual debate. It wasn't an ethical debate. There was a discussion about the effect on society, the upbringing of children, the stability of marriage. These, although they have moral undertones, are not moral statements. Right? These are factual ideas.
Well, I made a moral statement that it was wrong to rely on speculation.
Yes. Now, what I mean to say is the specific thing...
The statistics, and people have gone into this, say that the happiest and most flourishing children are those which are children of a happy marriage, and they are biological children.
I wouldn't be surprised if kids are generally happier being raised by their biological parents than parents who adopted them, but allowing gay couples to marry or adopt doesn't increase the number of orphans who need to be adopted. It's not like if the gay couples who adopt were barred from doing so, the kids whom they would have adopted would instead be raised by their biological parents. They'd just be stuck in the orphanage or the foster system for longer. And if kids are happier when being raised by married couples, then that seems like a good reason to let gay couples get married.
Well, I would say two things.
Bring Alex on this point, and maybe on this.
Two important things to that. Firstly, that is a descriptive statement. It's a statistical statement.
Yes, but he was accusing me of unjustified.
That's what he was doing. That's not what I'm doing. What I'm doing is pointing out that people are often making factual statements in so-called moral debates. I would also repeat your words from earlier that sometimes mere adherence to preference or something like that might not be the sole foundation of our ethics. I think it's important to note that was a mostly factual debate rather than, strictly speaking, a moral one, and that it has a lot to do with feeling. I also wanted to point out that there is this important undertone of theism and atheism. This makes a huge difference.
And do you think that's a factual difference that Richard and I are having.
The moral question is more general. The moral question is whether the sort of behavior, homosexual relations, has a damaging effect, whether the only thing to take into account is whether the two people involved like it.
I think we have enough evidence to see that it has no discernible damaging effect. It certainly doesn't have enough of an effect to justify the damage done by suppressing and stigmatizing gay couples.
The question is whether it has any certain effect on the wider people, society, and I think it does.
Well, you would be wrong.
But if it was shown that it doesn't make any difference and everybody was firm in their sexual orientations, then I would change my view.
So that factual distinction would change your view on this issue, which means that so much of what people might think is an ethical statement is a descriptive one. You have an ethical assumption, and it's being informed by descriptive statements. So I would say that whether or not there is enough evidence is a descriptive statement, but whether we should not rely on something without enough evidence is probably a moral statement. But crucially, I also wanted to point out that it is true that the Bible does mention homosexuality a few times. It mentions it a bit in the Old Testament, quite explicitly condemning it as at least a sexual practice, if not an orientation.
Well, the folks who wrote the Bible had no concept of sexual orientation. They only thought of it in terms of behavior, not in terms of a person's proclivity toward the behavior.
The New Testament, Paul mentions it possibly a few times, probably a few times, but it's always difficult to translate. Of course, Jesus didn't mention it once.
It's not a matter of what necessarily Scripture said. It's a matter of what the Church has pretty unanimously taught for 20th century as the teaching of God.
What I would invite people to do if they wish to see evidence of moral relativism, the kind of moral relativism that is often abhorred by religious communities as dangerous, as flippant, as the idea that you could change your moral opinions yesterday to today, and that would show that there's no objective threat, or at least that we can't trust the source from which it comes. I would invite people to investigate the history of the Church's relationship to slavery, and particularly the scriptural injunctions towards the ownership of other human beings as private property, the bequeathing of them to your children as inheritable property, and the differential treatment of slaves who are Israelites and slaves who are not.
The typical Christian rebuttal to this is that their religion always taught that slavery was wrong, but this idea was for some reason hidden in the subtext.
That is mentioned a lot more than homosexuality, and it's much more, in much more detail and with much more moral force, I think. And so what I wanted to point out is that it's easy to say, well, it's just a fact. If God says this is wrong, then this is wrong. God said a similar thing of slavery, but I hope and trust that most people in this room would disagree with at least that.
Yes, but when the Christian church started, what it says is the Old Testament must be interpreted in the light of the teaching of Jesus. And the church itself was inspired by God to work out the consequences of this teaching. So, the church at very beginning ruled out all sorts of things that the Old Testament says are not binding.
But of course, also in 1 Peter, we read, slaves, be obedient to your masters, not just the ones who are good.
Yeah, well, I think
who are cruel.
There's enough time of Scripture.
We find, I'm not sure that it is.
So often when Christian apologists are confronted with the passages of the Old Testament that say things they clearly don't agree with or obey, they will adopt this quasi-Marcionist stance that Jesus is kinder and gentler than the God of the Torah.
To everyone who helps me out on Patreon, you're a big help. Thanks so much.